Hey there, sports history fan. Arnie Chapman here from the Sports History Network. Now, before you jump into this episode, I wanted to share with you an exciting giveaway we have going on with Home Field Apparel. We have a digital $50 gift card to homefieldapparel.com for one lucky fan of the Sports History Network. All you got to do is head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways to sign up. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways.
Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
And we'd like to welcome everybody back to the Football's Family Podcast. And on this show, if you've listened to me for any period of time, I do a lot of football talk, and that's the whole idea of this. But I also like to hear stories and sports figures and people who are passionate about other sports and other things. And I have one tonight that she's been on before. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Bennett. I'm happy to be back again and talking football and families and other sports too.
Absolutely. Now, last time I was thinking about this. Last time I learned how to do two podcasts and mesh them together because we ran into a time constraint, which happens on Zoom. But you read us a book.
I did. And that's kind of why I'm here, is because I read you the book, The House That Ruth Built, about the opening day game of Yankee Stadium and Babe Ruth's big wish. He said he'd give anything to hit a home run in that opening day game. And a poem that I wrote became that book, The House That Ruth Built. And I'm thrilled because today, that's a picture book. It's a nonfiction picture book with a lyrical poem that started it all. And my new book came from that.
I told you this. I don't remember when we did this. It was a little bit ago.
It was 2 years ago. So it would have been, I can tell you, because April 19th, 2023 was the 100th anniversary of the opening day game of the original Yankee
So we were in
Stadium.
that area. Golly, has it
And
been
that's
2
when this
years?
book came out.
2 years.
I know.
You had an ease to you, and I remember telling you had an ease to you about reading. And I was like, okay, I want to see the next part. I want to see the next part. It was just like you drew me in. This book in particular, go ahead and talk about this because I'm holding it up. Like again, this is audio. As you could see in the audio, if we ever have Vision on audio files, would you like to introduce the book for you?
I have got, well, yes, you guys, what we are holding is what I'm calling tiny but mighty. It is called Out of the Mouth of Babe Ruth on Life, hitting, pitching, striking out, and coming back swinging. It is a nonfiction collection of quotes, glorious photographs, and just interspersed with slices of biography about and by Babe Ruth. The quotes mostly are by Babe Ruth. I have to tell you, because you guys are going to have to go to the store and see it, but the cover photo is one that baseball fans rarely have ever seen, and we dug really hard to get it. It is a picture of Babe Ruth in his New York Yankees uniform, hollering out from the dugout. And the front cover is a close-up of him hollering. And when you look at the cover, all you want to know is, what is he saying? And that's what's inside the book. What exactly did Babe have to say?
I bet you he's asking for a hot dog at that point. Something tells me that.
He might have been. He might have been. Put me in, coach.
Well, here's the thing about Babe Ruth. Again, you were more of the expert on this because I imagine you did a little research, just a little.
I'd say
He
a little
was
bit.
such an athlete that you look at the guy and you think there's just no way that he could do what he did. But I'm looking at this one on 109, 108,
Uh-huh.
109. Love this one. Love this one. He says, "Who is richer, the man who is seen but cannot see, or the man who is not being seen but can see?" And I think, wow, that's Yogi Berra type stuff right there.
Well, I have got to tell you, because this book came about while I was researching the house that Ruth built. You and I know Jeremy, and you readers need to find out for yourself. But along with the lyrical storyline are all of these sidebars of trivia and
Yep.
facts about baseball. And it's a little skinny picture book. I'm talking 32 pages for the youngest reader. I had to do a lot of research, and what I found was the more I learned about Babe Ruth, we hear about how raucous he was, we hear about how wild he was, we hear about how bigger than life he was, but he also was the first superstar athlete. And he was a really nice guy, a really humble guy. And what I found was that now you have to go back in the days before TV, before radio, before airplanes, before mass communication. Everybody learned everything they could by the radio. I mean, not by the radio, I'm sorry, by newspapers and news reporters. And the reporters would actually travel with the team hours and hours on the train and in hotels and restaurants, and they had a lot of time to talk to Babe, and Babe did like to talk. So what we're lucky enough to have, and in the beginning of the book, I do thank sports writers and newspapers, because we have so many of Babe's words, and he had hours to share them. And with those words came his philosophy on how he could become the super athlete and the superstar that he was.
You you put a lot of these pictures. He was a big guy, tall, big. Uh, there's one right here. I'm looking at it. This is pretty cool. Number page 74.
Uh-huh.
Shoeless Joe Jackson and him. It's funny to see, and I know you're grinning at that one. That one was probably
I
fun for
am.
you to find. It's funny to see because you don't always think of generations like Shoeless Joe Jackson, which only played one day without a shoe, one game without a shoe, and they stuck with that. You don't always think about those worlds meshing. Like they take place in different worlds, but they kind of mesh together. I got a book on my shelf, The Bible and History, and think everything is in its own little world, but it's not. Everybody coexists. When somebody like Shoeless Joe Jackson coexisted with Babe Ruth, who coexisted with Lou Gehrig, and it's just neat to me to see all that.
It's that 6 degrees of separation. What you don't know
Where's
is
Kevin
that Babe
Bacon?
Ruth credits Shoeless Joe Jackson. I know, I'm sorry. Babe Bacon.
There you go.
Shoeless Joe Jackson credits Babe Ruth credits Shoeless Joe Jackson for teaching him how to hit. He said he copied what Shoeless Joe Jackson did.
The thing about okay, educate me a little bit, okay? I'm here to learn. Home runs were not really a big thing in Shoeless Joe Jackson when he started.
Well, they were not a big home thing when Babe Ruth started.
That's right. Okay.
That's more that way, but they were both on the cusp. They called it back then the dead ball era, and we're talking about the the 1900s, beginning of the 1900s, late 1800s to the 1900s, until really 1914, when Babe Ruth joined the then Baltimore Orioles and started hitting home runs. He was as the death of the dead ball era, if you want to think about it. And the dead ball era means that back then, now the game was played, let's go back again. They didn't have official uniforms, and if they did have official uniforms, they didn't have their numbers on them. So the teams were named after the color of their socks mostly, because that was where they could get the difference. So that's where you had the brown stockings, you had the red socks, you had the white socks, you had all of these uniforms, and the players would just be out there. You could tell them apart by their socks because that was the one thing that was small enough and they could make them and change. So that's how you'd know who the players were. But they also didn't have very many balls. Their mitts were not like now, and their gloves, they weren't padded. They didn't have all the protection. And the players, the teams didn't have very many balls. So, and they did not have in the early days foul lines. So that was all of these innovations came later, the same way the time clock is coming now, the pitch clock, whether however you feel about it, to make the game go faster and easier. Because think about it, if a player hit the ball too far, there weren't fences up. They were playing on fields. People are going to be chasing that ball. If they lost it, what happens? The game's over. So
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, so the game was all about playing on the infield. The pitcher tried his best to get the batter to swing at anything. And by that, they would put anything they could think of, glue and scratch the ball and gum it up and tar it up and do whatever to make it bobble any way they could because they didn't want the batter to hit it. The batter's whole job was just to hit the ball and get on base. And then it was much more of an infield game. So they were playing, just trying to get around the bases, a lot of stealing, a lot of pickles, a lot of much more of an infield. Here comes Babe, 1914, straight out of St. Mary's in Baltimore, a boys' school with 800 boys. And Babe Ruth, clearly he had not gotten the memo because he got out there and he did just what his hero, one of the brothers, Brother Matthias at St. Mary's, and Xavier and brother, had taught him how to hit. Brother Matthias would throw the ball up and he would wallop the ball as far as he could and have those boys run and chase it. Well, Babe said when he saw Brother Matthias, he knew what he wanted to do. So here comes Babe to the major leagues. Little boy, $600 a year, thought he was rich, gets out there and he didn't hear the minnow. First thing he did was go out there and wallow the ball as far as he could, to the point where the newspapers criticized him for ruining the game. He wasn't being a gentleman, but the fans, they loved it.
Well, I'm looking at this, page 161. Explain this for me here, because this may go along. I read this. I'm like, I remember when you're talking like here, if I tried for them dinky singles, I could have batted around 600. Is that basically what you're talking about?
That's exactly it. They said that there was nothing more exciting than Babe Ruth hitting a home run. If there was anything more exciting, it was him striking out. He gave everything he could when he went up to bat.
And he did do a good job at the striking out, but I think he's the kind of guy that didn't believe in just walking.
No, in anything he did in life. And I have got to stop because I would be remiss if we let any more time go by before I talked about my co-curators in this book. While I was writing The House That Ruth Built, and while I was researching those sidebars, I had the good fortune to meet, and I was trying to think who. I think it is through the Babe Ruth Birthplace Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, but it might not have been. I met Tom Stevens, Babe's great-grandson, and his great-grandson, Brent Stevens.
Oh, wow.
And it was in the course of verifying the information for The House That Ruth Built and trying to obtain pictures that I became acquainted with them and the Ruth Stevens family friend, Stu Dressler. And so Brent and Stu and I got to be friends and spent a lot of time digging up photos. They were very helpful in gathering the material for that book, as was Tom Stevens, Brent's father, and Babe's grandson. That when we were finished with the book, The House That Ruth Built, and I had gathered all of this stuff, all of these phenomenal quotes from Babe Ruth, that I couldn't let it go yet. And I contacted Brent and Stu and said, what do you think about culling the archives of the Stevens Ruth family collection and putting together a book of quotes mixed with photographs of Babe Ruth, a lot from the family collection. And so this is not just my book. This is mine, Kelly Bennett, curated with Brent Stevens and Stu Dressler, because the three of us have been on this journey for the last couple years, along with Babe's family and so many Ruthian historians. Marty Appel, who put the forward in the book, and Bill Jenkerson, who's a Babe Ruth historian, and Tim Reed, who's another one, along with a lot of other people, really went to Ruthian efforts to help me make this book really a collector's item. And what I'm proudest of is that when I sent the manuscript out for vetting, even Tom said there are things in here that he didn't know about his own father. I mean, his own grandfather. So I'm really proud of the photos and the anecdotes that we've collected in here, and also the heart.
Did you get to see any of the memorabilia like firsthand?
Well, I've been to, yes. I've been to, all right, let's start this off. During COVID, I had a tour of Yankee Stadium, the museum in Yankee Stadium, and they have a lot of Babe Ruth. They have a whole section of Babe Ruth memorabilia in there. And then I went to the Babe Ruth Birthplace Museum, where they have a lot of it. I mean, you're standing in the museum that is below the second floor bedroom he was born in. Like if you go to Baltimore right now, the cobbled streets are the streets that he played on. I will bet you the windows across the street are not the same windows, because he probably knocked those out while he was playing baseball. I mean, it's so fascinating. And then also the Louisville Slugger Museum in Louisville has the bat, and in the book here, the contract that Babe made sure he signed 6 times. And that was because they wanted to get his signature right on the bat. So
I actually got to see that a few years ago. It's impressive.
it gives you chills.
Okay, we can get back to the book here in a minute. One of the things about this show that I enjoy is I have my passions for a limited thing. I love to see other people with their passions. And we might have talked about it 2 years ago, but please bring it back up again. Just seeing your eyes, of course, y'all can't see it, but people get sparkles. And Miss Kelly has sparkles all over the place, but her eyes are sparkling up when you're talking about those things. And it's a compliment. It's a compliment for me to tell you that. That's how I view it.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
you had that same sparkle when you're reading the book, you're reading the book a couple of years ago. What? Okay, let's go at it about it like this. You're more than welcome to take it and run with whatever you want. What drove you to this? Because people who have passions just don't fall into it. They may at the beginning, but the passion builds upon itself. You know what that means. It just keeps building. What
Yes.
drove you to this, and why now?
Well, okay, you have to clarify what drove me to this, like being a
Babe Ruth.
writer, or what drove
Babe Ruth. Something tells me you're a natural writer and storyteller. So the writing is probably something that developed over time, but you were drawn to that because it's who you are. There's something tells me that. Okay, you're good at it. Uh, but no, what drove you to him?
I, well, for one thing, there's this little boy, all of us, you, me, everybody. The little kid is inside of us. And you know, Jeremy, most of what I write are picture books from the 0 to 9-year-old age. So that is where my heart is. But what I see in Babe Ruth is a boy. That boy who was put in St. Mary's at 7. Well, he thought he was 8, but he was actually 7 years old, far from family. Like they put him on a trolley. He'd never been on a trolley before. And he's living in this boys' home with 800 kids. That boy goes from St. Mary's to become the man 130 years after he was born that is still arguably the most famous baseball player of all time. More than I mean, almost 100 years, but at least 80 since he touched foot on a baseball field. He is still the player that major league players today are comparing themselves to. Shohei Ohtani didn't break his pitching record until 1921. I mean, until 2021. You can see this is my passion. And I look here and I say, what made him, what did he have that was so special that could make him try so hard? And we know a lot of that comes from being a little kid who is not really loved and not really wanted and has to prove himself. And so many people who are good at what they do, they're trying to prove something. But beyond that, they say that in order to be a genius, to be the best at anything that you're going to be the best at, you have to forsake a lot of other things to strive for your goal. Babe Ruth didn't do that. Babe Ruth was the best of the best and also generous and also loving and also took time out to stop on the street and pick up a game of stickball with kids if they were playing. And when St. Mary's burned down, he didn't just go on playing his game. He got with the management to bring the St. Mary's Boys Orchestra on tour with the Yankees to earn the money to rebuild St. Mary's. Like, he never forgot who he was. When he was laying in the hospital dying of cancer, do you know that he sent money downstairs so the kids on the street could get some ice cream? I mean, this is a man who we hear about what a big, wild guy he was. And yes, he was, but he was also this little boy who he told his family one time, he told his Julia Stevens, his adopted daughter, that he never felt full. Part of the reason that he was big and ate, and you know, you hear about the hot dogs and you hear about his gluttony, and he never felt full. And maybe that came from being in St. Mary's when he got weenies on Sundays only. So that boy who became this big powerhouse man, he grabbed hold of my imagination and my heart. And I'm thrilled to write about him and share about him.
So when I tell you sparkle, that was a lot of them in there. You had a
Yeah.
lot of them. That smile, I'll tell you what, Miss Kelly, you are really into this. Now, I want to ask you a question here. Uh, did he ever get back with his family that took him to St. Mary's that you're aware of?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. So he ended up going from the Baltimore Orioles, and then he immediately went to the Red Sox, went on the train to the Red Sox. The first day on the train, he went to a diner, saw this girl, Helen, and she was 16 years old. They ended up getting married. She was lovely and she liked him a lot. Well, at that season, they went and they moved back home to Baltimore. So he went back. They said that he while he was at St. Mary's, a couple of times he went on parole, as he called it, and those are little quote marks in the air. He went back home to his family. And one time when his mom was really sick. Now, his mom was a lady named Katie, little teeny 4 foot something, young. She had 8 children. Babe Ruth was the oldest. She had 8 children, 2 sets of twins, and of those 8 children, only 2 survived. Babe, the oldest, and the youngest sister, Maisie. And they say that Katie really had some problems. Some people said she had a drinking problem. Some people said she had just laid around all the time. Now imagine back in that day, she probably had postpartum depression. And then his dad was a lightning rod salesman that turned into being a barkeep, and they kept a saloon at night. They lived over the top. His grandparents lived around the street, and he grew up in a place called Pigtown in Baltimore. It was close to the waterfront then. Now that we've renovated, it's a couple blocks away. They called it Pigtown because pigs literally, they would run them through the streets from the ship to the stockyard or vice versa. And they said if you were lucky on a Sunday and you reached out your basement window, you could grab a pig and have dinner. I mean, that's where he grew up, and his parents were busy all the time, and his mom probably was Well, imagine pregnant all the time, sickly, losing babies. She had no time for him. His father had no time for him. He also, they believe that he probably had ADD and he definitely had some difficulty reading because when he went to St. Mary's, he was put into younger classes and he was very embarrassed because he was in with the littler boys and he couldn't read very well. But he was also really smart and very generous. At St. Mary's, the boys were there to learn, but also to learn a trade because the Xavier and brothers knew that they would have to go out and make a living for themselves. Babe was in training to be a tailor. So they'd wake up at 6, they'd go to mass, they'd go to school for a couple hours, then they'd go to train in their trade, and they were paid. The Xavier and brothers kept a little bit of the money so they'd have a nest egg when they left at 21 years old. Imagine that.
Good gracious. 21.
And I know, not now. And then 21 years old, and Babe would spend his pocket money on candy and give it to the littler kids who weren't going to work yet because they didn't have any money. Like that was where he started. He was thinking about those other little kids even back then.
Would his, okay, let me see how I can word this and correct me, please, when I go off.
Uh-huh.
You tell him about his lifestyle. He seems to be the kind of guy that would be, have you ever seen the Savannah Bananas? Have you heard of them?
Oh, I haven't seen him yet. I so want to. I have put in for the lottery a lot of times.
Yeah, that Savannah Bananas, if you don't know it, it's family entertainment, 100%. They were going bankrupt for a while. Now they're selling out NFL stadiums. Come on now.
Oh,
That's
it's
all
so
about kids.
fun.
He seems to be that way, that he would give time for kids. Would his lifestyle right now, okay, his lifestyle back then, bigger than life, that sort of stuff, would it equate to today? Could he just go right into the major leagues?
It's funny because I've had to think about that, Jeremy. Babe Ruth is everybody, I'm well aware. He's famous for drinking a lot. He's famous for being wild. He flipped a lot of cars. They said one game he actually got pulled over by the cops because he was speeding and they found out who he was and they then gave him a police escort to the stadium to play the game and didn't give him the ticket until afterward. I mean, he was wild. But he also, when he was so famous, his face, think about this. This is before we had black and white photography. We did not have television. People saw his caricatures and black and white photos in newspapers, but because he was so distinct looking, they could pick him out of a crowd. He could not go anywhere without being mobbed. So they said on game days, he could not go down to the dining room and eat with the rest of the team. He'd have to stay up in his room and eat alone so that he could have breakfast and get ready for the game. And then afterward, he was out and he loved life and loved people. But on Saturday afternoon in Yankees games, before the game started, after morning practice, do you know where he'd be?
Where's that?
He'd go down and he'd bag peanuts with the peanut vendors. And there are stories about him. There is one in the book where he would sit down there, he'd bag peanuts, he'd tell them all, go to school, learn to read. If you want to be a baseball player, practice, you can make it. And then he'd give them a little bit of money if he felt like it. And they'd go, if he saw that they didn't have good coats on, he'd give them money for coats. But in today's world, I really had to think about what kind of superstar he'd be. And I really think that he would have a good heart. And I think he'd be one of the more generous, loving, warm-hearted superstars that we see. I'll tell you, I think he'd be a lot like Aaron Judd, who I'm really thrilled that old Aaron Judd, like everything I see about him, the way he treats his mom, the way he treats his wife, the fact that he stayed a Yankee. I apologize, Sammy Sosa. I think he's a team player and he's a family guy. And I believe that I don't know. It's tough, Jeremy, because the press was a lot more lenient with superstars then. Now we hear everything when it happens, no filtering, for good or for bad.
How about
And I don't
this?
know what that means.
How about this? How about we keep him in the world that he was? Because what happens is memories become, it's kind of like Christmas memories. They become better and better. And to me, I think if I met him, he would smell like cigars and just be a big teddy bear.
And this is a man who stood on rooftops of stadiums after signing thousands literally of baseballs, and he just hit them off the roof to crowds of kids.
That's awesome.
I mean, you don't hear that. And it wasn't because he got paid per baseball. It was for pure fun.
He looked, uh, John F. Kennedy had Addison's disease. And a lot of people said that the way he lived his life was because he knew that he could die pretty quickly because of Addison's disease. I wonder if Ruth knew where he came from, that his life was pretty short with his brothers and sisters and things like that. I wonder if he lived his life just because he said, I'm not going to I don't know about tomorrow. I'm just going to enjoy it and people are going to benefit from it. I wonder if that was what it was.
It could have been because when he was dying, this is really cool because they did not know what he had to start with. And it turned out that he had a type of cancer. He actually was one of the first people to receive radiation and current cancer treatments that we're using now. And he said, even then, do these experimental treatments on me because maybe it's going to help somebody in the future. Like that was his thought. He went out of his way to help other people.
And
And I
this is
think that's
something,
the man he would have been. And even if you talk to players, Lou Gehrig, for instance, you talked about him earlier. When Lou Gehrig came up, he wasn't playing very good. He came from college. He came from Columbia. He came earlier than he would have. He didn't get to graduate because his family needed money. And when he started out, he was really doing lousy. And Babe Ruth, rather than being jealous or mean or spiteful, helped him out. Said, here, try this, use my bat, don't listen to it. You can make it happen. Um, yeah, that's what he was.
Garrick did all right.
He did. He did.
I tell you what, we are running into the time that we were talking about in about 2 minutes. Actually, in about 1 minute, tell me a quick story about him and then tell us where you can get this book.
Well, that's horrible. I can't do it in 2 minutes, but I am gonna say that Out of the Mouth of Babe is full of pictures and stories like you and I are talking about. Him going to the boys' club and their little teeny scrawny arms like squishing their muscles and putting a tape measure on the wall and telling them, come on, guy, stretch just a little bit farther. You've got the arm of a pitcher. You've got the knees of a catcher. You've got the eye of an umpire, like really cheering them on. Um, Out of the Mouth of Babe is a book of inspirational quotes and vintage pictures and slices of biography by Babe Ruth that I hope baseball fans of any age and also anybody who wants to be inspired. Like I've got to tell you, one of my favorite lines was he said, a fella's got to have more between his ears. He's got to have more than curly hair between his ears.
Yep.
He's got to know his onions. His onions is noggin. He also said, home runs don't matter if you don't touch all the bases. You got to dot your I's and cross your T's. And that's what the book's all about. Out of the Mouth of Babe is by Kelly Bennett and with Bruce Stevens and Stu Dressler from Familias, and it is available everywhere April 15th.
I will put a link on it. Two things real quick. I enjoyed the picture of him diving off the diving board. That to me is classic right there. I don't care who you are. That is classic 20s physique. And the picture of him with Herbert Hoover, and it was talking about how much money that Babe Ruth made than the president did. And you'll have to look at the quote on that. That was, to me, I laughed at that. I was like, well, he was there with the president, the most powerful man in the world at that time, and he was talking how much more money he made.
He made more money and he said, well, I had a better year than he did.
Yeah, he did actually. And during that time, he really did. Miss Kelly, thank you for coming on.
And here,
You just tell, that's, yeah,
there's the last quote,
heroes get remembered.
but legends never die. And
Legends never die.
that's what it's about.
You are more than welcome. You just tell me I want to come on and talk more baseball. It's getting close to the time. It is.
Baseball season's on, y'all. Spring
You
train is hot and heavy.
you
And
tell me when you want to go on, and you always have a spot here.
oh, thanks, Jeremy. I love talking with you. Look
Yeah.
forward and all, we're family.
Yeah.
Football's family, baseball's family, we're family.
When you are
Thank
on
you
this,
for that.
when you're on this, you're part of my family. So be careful because it's a little bit weird. Thank y'all for listening to the Football This Family podcast.
Hey, thanks. Bye.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.